Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me is my co-host, Jussara Korngold. Jussara is the Secretary General of the International Spiritist Council and former President and current Vice President of the United States Spiritist Federation. For the past 30 years, Ms. Korngold has been volunteering as counselor in fraternal conversation in several Spiritist institutions as part of an outreach program. If you want to know more about fraternal conversations, please let us know. The Psychology in Spirituality program is brought to you by AMI Brazil, the Brazilian arm of the Spiritist Medical Association, the United States Spiritist Federation, the TV channel TV Mansão do Caminho, and the International Spiritist Council. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you'd like to check out our other channels, you can check it at spiritist.us. Jussara is here with me to talk about a very interesting idea, the concept of not only reconciliation, but also redemption. And I would say redemption with ourselves. So, what comes to my mind, Jussara, is the fact that some church figures, very prominent church figures like St. Augustine, St. Francis, or Paul, the Apostle, come to my mind as great examples of individuals that came to a turning point and decided to take this road to redemption. As we begin this topic, I want to just say before we go on, please send us your questions, your comments, your feedback via the chat window. Would love to hear from you, and we'll have a special episode to address them. We really appreciate you. Jussara, it's so good to have you return to the podcast like series of discussion today.
Hello, Marcia. Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thanks everyone that has been following our podcast, our episodes. We have been having some wonderful feedback and people following this program. And like Marcia said, if you have questions, if you want, specific topics related to the works of Joanna de Angelis, you can, ask ourselves as well. We will be glad to accommodate and to bring those topics to you because we are here to learn. And like Marcia was saying, about redeeming ourselves, redeeming oneself, acknowledging and actually going to the action of doing all this is our goal, is the goal that Joanna de Angelis brings to us in all of her works.
That's right. That's right.
Mhm.
But Jussara, if you humor me, I'm thinking we could actually reference this topic today with the parable of the prodigal son. Is it okay?
Absolutely. It's a beautiful, I think it's absolutely in sync with what we want to be discussing here today.
Yeah, and I don't know you in the audience, you may know this, so just forgive me if you do. But if you think about Jesus, at the time that he was with us, about 2,000 years ago, he rarely pointed out your mistake, my mistake, individual mistakes. He knew about the ego and our automatic defense mechanism, among them denial, which is ha 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 more than a river, but a bad joke, sorry. But as we can think about, Josara, Jesus was such a master storyteller, and he used the mechanism of parables such as this to provide us all in insights to our own humanity. and unfortunately, in itself, the sense of a very immature yet natures. So his teachings could help us recognize, could help us analyze, could help us perhaps dive into our existential conflicts. So, with all the parables, I just think that this one, the prodigal son, is the very best. At least it speaks to my heart. And why do I think that? I think that because it represents hmm, the synthesis of spiritual growth, spiritual evolution, and it helps us reflect, what are we doing? How are we doing? So, with that, I want to ask you, Jussara, can you tell us what the parable is about, and maybe what are some key topics that you have thought, and how does it lead to this discussion at hand?
Okay, Marcia. It's important also to mention that this parable is uh, quite profoundly studied and discussed in the works of Joanna de Angelis, in one of the works of Joanna de Angelis, which is the book called In Search of the Truth, and where she, in chapter 2, she start using this parable, first of all, to, like you said before, to lead us to um, analyze that we have the greatest psychotherapist with us, that is Jesus, and only now we are recognizing the depth of his messages to the point of correlating them to what we have in psychoanalysis now, the Jungian Jung concepts, all of this. So when she proposes this parable, and for those who are not familiar with, we are going to make a very brief comment about the parable itself. Jesus talks about a man that has two sons, and he was a very rich man. He owned land and other riches, and the youngest son comes to him and asks him for his part of the inheritance. And this is when Joanna de Angelis says, in this moment, he's very much like ourselves when we are thinking about outgrowing our parents, and especially when we get into the teenager years, where we think we don't need anymore their inputs, that maybe the parents are too old. In this particular case, he would say, I'm not going to wait here for you to die. I want to enjoy life. I wanted to, to exploit life by myself, of course, always with an aim of pleasing himself more in the sensorial way than in the spiritual way. So the father agrees and lets him go, gives him his part of the inheritance, and he has an older son that stays with the father. And so the parable goes talking about, all the experiences that this young man had. Of course, at first enjoying life, the pleasures of life, until, of course, we know what happens, right? He ran out of money. His situation was very, very bad, to the point of him not even having any more any food or any place to be. And he started thinking again about everything that he left behind while he was with his father, and now the situation that he found himself. And he thought that it was better to return to his father's house, not worrying about humiliating himself or not. I don't know if you wanted to comment something at this point,
No,
Marcia.
no,
Okay.
I just love it. The idea of, right, that going all the way deep in the deep recesses of his own humanity, right? Where I don't know if you like to mention this, but you mentioned that he did not have any food, right? But he actually had to fight with the pigs in the pigsty to be able to feed himself. So I think this is very symbolic to us, right?
Yeah.
But go ahead, Jussara, you're doing an amazing, amazing job.
He returned to his home, and when he was approaching, he was seeing already, and the workers of his father came and told his father that they could see him, you know. Coming in drags, looking as we can imagine he would be looking. And when he reaches the house of his father, in a very humble situation, and humbling himself before the father, kneeling down, even kneeling down, his father grabs him and embraces him. And he is so happy with his return that he asks that what is I forgot what the animal, one of the sheep, the calf that he had would be killed to have a party at that time to celebrate his return, and the eldest son was not at home. And it's interesting because symbolically speaking, not being at home means you're not being in harmony with yourself. So that was the condition of the eldest son. He was not in harmony with himself. And when he returns, then when he sees what is happening, he was not pleased with what his father was doing, and even complained to his father, saying, "I've been here by your side all the time, and you never did that for me." And then his father says, "Well, I'm celebrating because this son was that, and now he came back to life." So there is so much for us to analyze here and to talk about this parable in terms of like Joanna de Angelis mentions in this book, In Search of the Truth, where she explains about the situation of both sons not being in a good condition. It's not because the eldest one, stayed there with the father, that he was rid of selfishness and personal interest in this case, and then being envious when the brother returned. So he was there, but not in peace. So there are two ways that Joanna de Angelis explains to us in this book, where the extrovert and the introvert. So the youngest son being the extrovert, going, not fearing the world, and putting himself out there, and of course, because he was looking for good times and what's the word that I'm looking for? He was looking for good times in things that do not last, right? Illusions.
Yeah, very ephemeral, very material
Ephemeral.
expressions of those experiences, right?
Yes. And the other one, maybe being more introvert, it stays because he has fear, he doesn't trust people, he feels somehow protected, but it doesn't mean that he is in this condition that we want to talk about today, the redeeming oneself, the acknowledgement, the awakening, and taking action in this direction. I'm going to stop now, Marcia, because I think contributions to give to us as well.
No, this is awesome, right? So, as I said before, we are the prodigal children, right? We leave our father, our God, our creator, our master, and and then we come back. And to me, what comes to my mind is mostly, why does the father allow, right? Why does the father allow his youngest son to go knowing what he knew of the dangers of hurt? And he does that because of love, right? Because he knows that by getting to that, the depth of despair, as I mentioned, that that was the trigger point for him to come back, for him to really face what he couldn't face because of delusions of a material world, delusions of those ephemeral things that are gone once they're used. So the sense of a waste, which is not a waste if you think about it. But I wanted to ask you here, as we explain the parable, Jussara, what is some of the relevance to this topic that we have here, this redeeming of ourselves, this redemption, and in a way, this, to me, this reconciliation, because as you already mentioned, neither child was okay yet. Neither child was ready yet. Like you and like me, if you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, we all have to face our own quote unquote demons to be able to mature and be in harmony with the Father, right? Symbolically speaking, our Creator. But what are some of the things that maybe we can talk about, or maybe other examples outside of the parable, Josiah, that we could talk about perhaps in this topic?
Okay. One thing that is important to mention as well, Marcia, is because one of them, the youngest one, he made
Mm-hmm.
a physical movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
He went out. The other
Right.
one didn't go out,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't mean that he was in harmony, like we mentioned
Right.
before.
Right.
So, in this sense, in mentioning what you just commented there, we understand that us immortal spirits, when at the point of our creation, as simple, ignorant no knowledge of things, but we have one thing that is given to us so that we can grow with our own merit, that is the free will. So in this case, the manifestation of the Father accepting,
Mm-hmm.
the free will of the Son, both of them, because one decided to go, the other one decided to stay. He could have said, well, you know what, I want to do the same thing as my brother is doing. So he also had a choice. And here what's interesting is that the process of growing,
Mm-hmm.
of going into this path of redemption, renewal, awakening, it shows clearly that we learn through experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to experience things. We experience life, but then how we are going to experience is up to us. What are the choices that we are going to make? So it is not overnight. In this case, it's not 1, 2, 3 incarnations that we are going to be ready to choose better, but each time we will be choosing better. And this process of knowing, understanding ourselves, it can be, painful, right? It's the growing pains of the
Yes.
spirit.
Yeah.
In this case of this parable, we see the symbology of the Son going through this process of pain, of reflection, of saying, but here I have to dispute food with the pigs, while there in my father's house, the lowest employee would have, decent food. So I'm willing to go there and start from this position. So we see here that he went through a process that, unfortunately, he chose the way that most of us choose, which is, no, I'm going to rebel. I'm going to do things my way, and I know better, until we see that we don't. And we
Yes.
see there are much better choices that I could have made. And this process, although being a consequence of our free will, which is a good thing, which gives us the merit of our own choices, not that we are, God's puppet. It's what leads us to this maturity, to this encounter with the axis, ego and self. First of all, it's the ego, like the child, like this prodigal son. I want to satisfy all my whims. I want everything that is going to give me, this ephemeral happiness, because I want things for now. I don't want things in building up, in growing. And but then all this process that it leads us to the realization that once we get there, it's not fulfilling us. It will naturally lead us to this other path. And this is where the topic that we are talking about today, it's very important, because it's not only about acknowledging things, in this path of redemption, or redeeming ourselves. It's about action. What am I going to do after that? Because many of us, and for sure we did that many times, we just insist in not seeing a way out, not thinking that we are capable of taking a different direction. Of course, when you think about this prodigal son, I mean, he had to go to the lowest point of his life.
Yes.
Right. And it didn't happen overnight. It was not overnight that he was in that kind of situation. Right. So he had to go to more, bad experience, until he came to the realization that he was better off if he returned to his father's house. Returned to the Eden, so to say.
Yes.
But the thing is, now it comes the hardest part for us all, which is get ourselves and saying, I need to act on that, which was not easy. I mean, the whole way to return, he had a lot of time to think about, my father's not going to receive me. I'm going to be there and be the lowest, of the employees. Had to recognize that I was wrong. And then, we have to fight with our pride. It's so many things. And he did that. And this is how Jesus, in such a figurative way, he brings to us, the whole process of moving from just the ego and not staying, in the shadow as well, thinking about not being capable of doing things, or letting it overtaking us, and go in the direction of the self, of this awakening and what happened there. And we have so many examples, starting with ourselves. Maybe we are not still, a story of success, but this is because we don't see exactly what we were before. Because I'm sure that if we were going to look at us 1,000 years ago, we would say, "Oh my God, I'm so good today," right? And it's when we have, uh, some of these examples, like Paul of Tarsus, that you mentioned, St. Augustine, Mary of Magdala, and St. Francis of Assisi, and that we can talk about it as well. I know many of you will say, "Oh, but you are just talking about saints. We are no saints." No, we are not, but they started like us. They had to go through this process. In fact, one of the comments that we can read about, this whole transition from Saul of Tarsus, the first persecutor of and killer of Christians, starting with Stephen, to Paul on the road to Damascus. We have a comment from Divaldo Franco that he says that we find in Saul, Paul, the archetype of the hero as conceptualized in Jungian psychology, because he was asleep and suddenly he awakes, and in the same way that we see in the parable of the prodigal son. And in the same way, he doesn't stop when he has this, let's say, encounter, right, with Jesus. He doesn't stop to argue. Once he acknowledges, he just asks,
Mhm.
"What do you want me to do?" And he goes into this process of collecting himself, staying 3 years in the desert, right, where he can start this journey, moving from the ego to the self and to the right direction. But I'll let you speak a little bit now, Marcia, and then we
Okay,
can take out other
correct.
examples.
No, no, yes, and I think both the parable of prodigal son, with many of the symbology that we find in it, Jussara, and of course that, as you said, right, the archetype of the hero, and it's very important for us to even go back to why do we even talk about archetype of the hero, and the hero is only heroic when he or she does not know the own its own strength, right? So, for example, just for a flight of fancy here, if I am a, I don't know, super muscular boxer, and I'm fighting with a 3-year-old child, I'm not the hero, the child is. Right, so it's the whole notion of David and Goliath, the person who does not know of the strength that he or she carries within, and despite, this is really important, despite of the fear that is embedded in this person, he or she moves on, and that's that archetype. So when we talk about Paul and Saul Paul, and we talk about Mary Magdalene, great example, or Saint Francis or Saint Augustine, all of those, the first thing that comes to my mind, Josara, is that acknowledgement, right? They had to acknowledge the how in their zest for reaching what was the perhaps the pinnacle in each case, the pinnacle of success as defined by their context of the time, right? They reached that, and in doing that they confronted to the error or the notion of, oh, I was asleep, this is just an illusion. Being the most beautiful and rich woman, Mary Magdalene, is not what I need to be, or Saul of Tarsus, the intelligent, the one that was going to be doing so much for the um, the religious organization of the time, and in doing that, killing others, right? Or so on and so forth. Those illusions of success fed their egos, destructed their egos, and by breaking down, by falling down, by being awakened with whatever the triggers are. And I say this, Jussara, because we may be going through the same thing ourselves. What is our trigger? I ask you, I ask myself, what is it that's going to wake me up to really see how I was a prisoner, if you will, of illusion? I was really unaware, immature. And now that I've been awakened for whatever triggered me to wake me up, I will take action and move toward my authentic self. And that journey is really the hero journey, is going to meet your authentic self. And by doing so, you're going to destroy, to break away those illusions by finding yourself, right? Self with a uh, a big S instead of a small one. But to me, those are the things that are so important. And if we go back to perhaps to Paul, and I'd love to hear you, Josada. We can talk a little bit about, you said, the 3 years in the desert, right? And as he's doing that, as equipped as probably one of the most intelligent, eloquent people out there at the time, what does he do? He's pushed out, right?
Right. And you see, Marcia, I was thinking that there is one thing that we have to put it very clear here. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said,
Mm-hmm.
when we mention those names, these people, Mary of Magdala, Paul, and St. Augustine, St. Francis, like I said, it seems that it's out of reach to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because now we know their stories after they take this step to let the self prevail, they had this click, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But before, they were exactly like us. So this is what is missing in us, and the determination, of course, to stay and on track. Because if we start thinking about soul, all of those, okay, the four of them,
Sure.
they all went to deep suffering before their awakening. Okay, soul was killing people.
Mm-hmm.
Knowledge. He had a brilliant future in and as a Pharisee, but he was getting into this conflict. He was going through losses, the loss of his loved one, Abigail, that died, and when she told him that she was a follower of Christ, and he felt robbed by Christ of his love. So he
Mm-hmm.
went to deep suffering, to the point when upon killing, stoning, sending to stoning Stephen, and he goes to Stephen, and he says and looks to Abigail, his the love of his life, Saul's love of his life, and says, he's a good man, and forgive him. He will find himself. And I mean, all of that made such commotion in him. I mean, he cannot come out superior in the circumstances. I'm the
Mm-hmm.
superior one because I'm ridding the world of those heretic people. That was the
Mm-hmm.
thought of Saul at this point. So
That
he
was his
went.
mission, right? That was his
Yeah.
mission.
So
Yeah.
he was into this process. He went into this process of suffering, and even when he meets Jesus and he stays blind for a few days, and had to be healed by the very man he was going to persecute. And then he saw himself alone in the world, because now I don't have my old world, and I'm not in the new as well.
Yes.
I don't trust myself, or people will not trust me. When we think about Mary of Magdala, it's the same thing. He went, and St. Augustine the same. They both went to moral decay. They both had, lived a very hedonistic life, seeking sexual exploit, trying to to numb themselves as well. And St. Augustine, in this case, very, very intellectual mind as well, a philosopher that would be, bringing philosophical theories here and there. And his mother was a very devout Christian, and she would pray daily for him to go into the ways of Christ. And he didn't want to know anything about it until he read something, and an account of the life of Saint Anthony of the Desert, and he started going to this personal crisis.
Yeah.
But he had to go to all this moral decay and this personal crisis, and Mary of Magdala the same, and even St. Francis, because St. Francis was living a very idle life. He had a rich father. He had no worries in life. He was so beloved by his mother as well, and by his friends and companions. And then he decided to go and defend Assisi against the war in Perugia. And then he is captured and stayed there for a year as a prisoner. That, was something that was also helping building up his character. This in terms of the suffering, everything that he had to, he experienced during this year, returning with his health compromised, and then trying to go again a few years after to fight for his region there. But he started becoming ill, and something else was calling him. And so we see that before the sun rises, the dark.
Yes.
And I think that if we could perhaps make an image of this axis, ego and self is, the dark and the light. And but one thing that we find in common with all of them, once they had reached this point, that doesn't need to go. I mean, we don't need to go that deep. We can learn through the opportunities we have through love, but we choose the more difficult way. But once they did that, they had this click, like you said.
Yeah.
They immediately took action. They acknowledged what was happening. They awake, and they took action, and marching in the right direction. But they had to build from there. It was not that it was giving to them. We know everything. St. Francis suffered, and St. Augustine as well. I mean, he left everything behind. And Mary of Magdala living a very, carefree life, and then going to stay with the lepers and taking care of them. So, yeah. So just for us to think that it doesn't need to take many incarnations for us to see this movement from us. We can do this movement now, and then it's a journey of just growing and building up from there.
So let's wrap it up, right? So we talked about if we put it all together, if I may. So we talked today about this road to redemption, right? This reconciling with oneself, and I think this is really important because no matter who we're talking about, a fictional character, and we're talking about the prodigal son, or real life, Paul, Mary, Augustine, so on and so forth. Those were real individuals that, from different standpoints, they were being brought up, they're raised to reach a sense of, and I even dare to say, Jussara, like the prodigal son, a, a, a choice of life that would lead to a modicum of success. Unfortunately, that sense of achievement was all of them are examples of achieving success, either by intelligence, by power, by beauty, by wealth, right? All of them come there with the notion that the sense of happiness and success are really built on external material characteristics or attributes. So by confronting the one thing that all of them were experiencing, and I think this is where we can come here, we do too, which is the trigger point is the recognition when we meet with ourselves, when we are truthful to ourselves, that don't leave we don't live in peace, that we're lacking. And when I say lacking, there's this hole in our hearts because all we do is to nourish in Jungian psychology terminology our ego, that structure that meets the demands of the external material world instead of the self, which is the structure of your spiritual and true self, right? The authentic self. So from that perspective, Josada, the recognition that there is something missing despite the beautiful clothes, and I'm thinking about St. Francis, right? Or the beauty of, say, Mary Magdalene, or the sheer intellect of Paul and Augustine, and in the case of Paul, his power, all of those things were not enough. And I think this is the main questions that were here as perhaps the so-called fallen angels. And by angels, I talk about the potentiality of the angelitude that we all bring with us in our journeys, plural, life after life, right? We have this, but we are driving toward the illusion of life on earth, which is that life that is built on ephemeral expressions of material life. Without peace, and that's the clencher here, without peace, we will never get there. And to achieve peace, it requires us to confront ourselves, to be able to then start the journey to redemption, which is really to redeem what we're here to do in the beginning. And I think this is beautiful. Jussara, I would love to hear from you a wrap up of this discussion. But I think this is really important because I can talk about love, I can talk about peace, I can talk about harmony. But those examples really tell us without peace, inner peace, nothing works. And I'll be walking with this vacuum that I will need to fulfill no matter what. And the no matter what are exemplified by those existential conflicts that we talked earlier today. What are your thoughts? Can you wrap it up so
Yeah.
we finish this? It's a beautiful discussion, by the way.
Yeah, I wanted to just say something to everyone that is hearing us, that are following us now, and which is maybe we all are now, or many of us are now, in this part of our lives that we are in the desert.
Mhm.
The 3 years of the desert of Paul, and all the the others that we don't have, not necessarily like we have this information from Paul, but of course they all went to this process where we were saying before, I realized that my old ways are no longer working in my best interest, which is the interest of what an immortal being should be looking for, but I'm not there yet. So do not feel discouraged, because if we are in this phase now, there is no time or for us to go back. We have to move forward. So maybe we are having challenges now. We are making this effort to continue to act in righteousness, but this is what we have to do. So see yourself as being through this journey, because we are going through this journey. And of course, if you're listening to us, you're already interested in learning more about our potentiality, and about where we should be going now. So this is the message that I would like to leave all with. And we are together in this journey.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great closing for everyone out there. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate you. We appreciate your comments, your feedback, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.